In the world of work today, one narrative has dominated for a long time. The idea that long hours and relentless hustle, loyalty, and respect, as John Cena would say, are essential for success. Now, industry leaders like Infosys co founder Narayan Murthy have advocated for young professionals to work a 70-hour week, believing that it is the price you have to pay for ambition. L&T chairman S.N. Subramaniam took this to new extremes a few weeks ago, suggesting that employees should work up to 90 hours a week, including Sundays. And not to be outdone, Elon Musk recently tweeted that employees at Dodge, which is of course the Department of Government Efficiency, are working 120 hours a week. Insane, isn't it? But in recent months, an increasing number of voices are challenging this glorification of a burnout. Capgemini India's CEO Ashwin Yardi has spoken against the long hours culture. He says that it should be capped at 47.5 hours. This is in stark contrast to what we saw of 70 to 90 hours. Now, keep in mind that if you even a 47.5 hours means you're working for 9.5 hours every day if you look at a 5-day week cycle. Meanwhile, in a bold move, Viva Foods' Viraj Bahl is pushing back even further. In a recent interview, Bells shared how his company has slashed its work week to just 40 hours, arguing that extended hours without adequate returns, like equity stakes or significant financial gains, are unsustainable both for the individual and the company. Now, as the pressure mounts on employees and the hustle culture becomes more entrenched, it's clear that the conversation is shifting. Are long hours truly the path to success, or is it time for companies to reevaluate the toll it takes on their employees? With these leaders advocating for a more humane work-life balance, is India on the brink of a transformation? Can it afford a transformation in its work culture? Or is the demand for mere hours simply here to stay? On tonight's Beyond the Headline, we will break down this growing debate. Can India's work culture finally find a balance between productivity and efficiency? Let's go across to my guests who are joining me at this point. I am being very privileged to be joined with a panel of esteemed guests representing all sides of the spectrum. We have Sri Parthasarathi, who's a partner, and leader at Forvis Mazars. We also have Professor Swati Dher, who is the associate professor at IMI Delhi. Rahul Bajaj is CEO of Digital Darwin, and also Anulal, who is a lawyer and an author. They're all joining me at this point. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me on a Thursday evening. I hope this is not adding into your already long work week, I'm sure, which all of us have been going through. But let me start first with Rahul Bajaj. Rahul, you're a CEO. You employ, I'm sure, a sizable number of people here. I want to start off with your take. We have seen wild variety of takes as to what should be the ideal number of hour work week in terms of hours, from 40 to go all the way to 90 plus. What, according to you, is the ideal number of hours your employees should work every week?
So, Ritangshu, I think the numbers that have been talked about, be it 40, 47.5, you can add 3 hours here and there and take it to 52 or whatever numbers, 60. It does not matter till the time you are addressing a central question that for the employees you are expecting to work for you, are you addressing that what is in it for them? If you are addressing that particular question, then it does not make any difference on what number of hours they are working. If they would want to work higher number of hours because there is an aspiration that they would want to meet, then they are absolutely happy to do that. If you are not addressing that, okay, and if it is a general rule, a cookie cutter rule, which you are putting across the board without even looking at what your employee needs, then it does not make any difference that you're asking them to work for 60 hours or 80 hours or even 50 hours, right? Because again, the outcome-driven metric is the most important thing. It is not about how many hours you're sitting on the desk. If you are able to produce in 45 hours or in 50 hours, you should be good with that. But it also depends on various different other factors. What is the stage of the career that you're talking about? Initially, when the employees in the initial years, when they are still learning the trades of the trick, or the tricks of the trade, I'm sorry, then they do put in more number of hours. If you are looking at an aspiration to grow fast, then you have to put in more hours. If you're okay to just float in the water, then you can absolutely be in that particular cookie cutter world. But if you are looking
No,
for
so
learning swimming,
if I've
then
if I've
yes. Sorry.
if I've got you correct, Rahul, you are essentially saying that if someone is starting off at the beginning of their career in the early 20s or mid 20s or early 30s, that is the time when one really needs to hustle. And in order to build an exceptional career, one really needs to move above these concept of time bound hours or dare I say a concept of a work life balance. Would you go as far as that, even at this moment?
So again, work-life balance is something is something different for could be different for you, could be different for me. If I'm happy to work on
Fair
Saturdays,
enough.
then I have no complaints. It's completely balanced life for me. It could be that you may be wanting to call Friday afternoon as the end of the week. So be it. If that is for you, do that. But then you can't compete yourself, or you can't compete, or you can't compare yourself with someone who's doing much more, or is learning many more skills than you, just because they are putting more hours.
Okay. I get your point. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with all of it, but let me bring in Professor Swati there. Professor there, if I'm not mistaken, you've had an extensive background in dealing with human resources also. Is this a fair logic that, in your early 20s and 30s, you're expected to work more? And at the end of the day, even if it is not mandatory, it is highly encouraged because the reward will only come to those who give their 120%, 150%, maybe do overtime, maybe are ready to come in on weekends at this point. We all know it's an unwritten law of the jungle, the corporate jungle. We have all seen that in act and practice. But is that something which should be ideal? At the end of the day, if an employee is paid for 9 hours or 8 hours a day, why should someone who works more than 10 or 11 hours be rewarded for that?
Yeah. So I think it's a very tricky question that, in the beginning of the career, you should spend more time than the later half of the career. But at the same time, I would say that initially when you are beginning your career, when you are developing in your skills, your corporate skills, it's very, very important that you are very open to new experiences. And this is where you spend more time, you have the high learning agility to learn more, to acquire more skills, and you are open to new experiences altogether. So maybe you are spending more time, but I would still not agree fully with the our speaker saying that it's not important that you. It depends. There is a rat race going on. I would say that people actually keep on telling that if you are spending more time, you are
Exactly.
doing this. It is actually also creating a lot of peer pressure, which is not a good idea. So I think in certain organizations, I don't want to name, but there are organizations which encourage that you should actually do not send mails over weekends, right? Give a quality time to unwind so that a person can actually start again. It's very important that you have that time, so that when it also depends that what kind of work you are doing. If your work requires a lot of intense high degree of creativity, you need to have that kind of buffer. Your mind also needs that break. So it's very, very important that it's not, the time spent is not proportional to the quality of the output. So it's very, very important that you understand, depending on your work, depending on your industry, depending on the career trajectory you are in, you have to make a balance. So as I agree with the person saying that there is no one size fits all, but at the same time, you also need to make sure that there is enough buffer for everyone to have the right balance in the life.
Here's my problem with this logic of meritocracy that the harder you work, the more extra you put in, the more you get rewarded. Because let me bring in Shri Parthasati at this point before I go
Yeah.
to Anulal. Shri Parthasati, let's assume that you have 3 or 4 people who are at the same age, at the same level, at the entry level in a corporate place. One person has his or her entire home in Delhi here, has a family to look forward to, has someone to cook and clean for that person. He or she just has to come to office and go back. Another person has come from a tier 2, tier 3. Us bande ko ghar bhi chalana hai. That person also has to deal with the maid. That person also has to cook food for himself. So that person has a whole extra work to deal with after going. Third person probably has to deal with a health scare. So the person obviously has to go and take care of that, has to go for physiotherapy or go for a gym and so and so. That person cannot commit to more than 9 hours a week. Fourth person probably does not want to, because that fourth person also wants to pursue a hobby, because that person also wants to take up musical instrument to play a sport. Now, according to the meritocrat argument, that the first person, because that person has the luxury of putting in more hours at work, that person should be rewarded with corporate perks, with a better promotion, with a pay. But is that fair? Because not everyone comes at the same level in terms of what their lives are outside work.
Ritangshu, the way I would primarily look at it is, when you are bringing in a person, I think you're bringing in them for a specific job role. That is one. Based on the job role, what happens is, if there's a clear definition of what is it that you are expecting from them, and you're performing what I would call as goal settings with them and expectation settings ahead of time, then you can really balance that out in terms of what is the outcome and expectation you can have of that person. Because very often this is what happens, right? When employees come in, and when they are, or when a person is a prospect and who's trying to come in, at that point, they want to possibly negotiate a very high salary, a very high compensation, all of those particular aspects, and they want all the other benefits that they are really looking at. At the same time, when an organization is going ahead and paying that kind of money, there's also an expectation in terms of outcomes. However, I agree with you that you need to strike a balance, because there are people in different stages of their career, and as Professor Swati said, people may want to take something slower, in which particular case that is fine, but then if they want to take a path which possibly is just 3 days a week and they want to work, then there has to be a balance that they basically strike. At the same time, you said about somebody who has a healthcare or something that he wants to balance. But if I were to look at a high performance organization, then the high performance organization has to be based on the goals, the outcomes, the performance, and equitable compensation, right? And on the same side, if I look at the expectation of 40-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, and other things like that, I would lean towards what Mr. Bell said in that is Veena Capital, and what he said is, I think for it to be sustainable, then you also have to have that kind of a sweat equity stake, or other alternate rewards for those particular people, because there are people who are willing to give that kind of a sweat, and you want to do that. And the biggest differentiation is, I think, our definition of work, right? And that is where it's a job or a work. But if you make it in such a way that the person belongs, and you make it the part of the person's, what you call passion, the person's career, and he really is yearning to do it, then trust me, he will even give 100 hours or 120 hours there.
So you are saying that there has to be a form of reward in which someone who does choose to pursue excellence is rewarded, without punishing someone who sticks to the basic minimum that has been mandated in his or her employer agreement. Anulal, have we got it wrong at this point by fixating over hours? You're a noted lawyer, you're an author at this point. I'm sure in your work you have never, if you have been writing a book, for instance, I'm sure you've never thought to yourself that, 9 hours ho gaye or 8 hours I'm done with the week, I'm not going to write this extra chapter here. Sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, when you are a self-employed person, you don't have the luxury of dealing about hours or dealing about work-life balance at this point. Is that necessary, the culture perhaps, which also corporate India needs to keep in mind?
I tend to agree with you, because when you are doing work for yourself, you tend to lose track of time, because you know that the rewards are coming to you and you alone. You are the primary receiver of the rewards. But that said, I'll also say that companies can also be exploitative, and work culture can also be super toxic. There is no denying that. No? But let me take you back to a story of aspirations. Like when I started my work career, I didn't know what a Patek Philippe watch was. But soon, within a few years of my work life, that watch, owning it, defined my career success. It defined my happiness when just a few years ago, I did not even know about it. So, like Brad Pitt says in Fight Club, that advertising has us working in jobs we hate so we can buy stuff we don't need, trying to impress people we don't like. So at some point, individuals also need to turn the searchlight within, pause and calm down and then define your success. That whose ambition are we working with? Hustle is for what? Is it something that I need, or is it the society's vision that I'm living by? So that personal exercise, I think, saves a lot of unnecessary hard work. And people who define their own success don't really fall into this trap of too much work. But if we look at the society's definition of success, and that's when we work towards, then we don't have a chance of defining our own financial goals and success goals. And I think this is what is happening to Indian youth right now. Living, you see a different report that they're living on a perpetual EMI cycle, a debt trap, which is almost borderline slavery. And these two things are quite connected, because here is where addictions and gambling and junk food, everything comes in together. There's only as much that you can push your mind and body. Absolutely. You cannot push your mind and body beyond a particular number. So ideal hours are, I think, also for an individual to search inside. Now, like the realized masters would say, that life is like a tanpura string. Now, tune the string in a way not so hard that it breaks, and not too loose that it doesn't generate music. So at some level, I think खोज बत्ती अंदर की तरफ ले जाने की जरूरत है. Some bit of awareness.
So, Anulal, if I've got you correct, I think inside. What you're saying is also tying into what Rahul Bajaj was also saying, is that if the goal comes out as a society or community welfare, as what Mr. Narayan Moti has infamously said, that we are or even someone from Ola has said that we are a developing economy, we are a poor country, we need to work so many hours for the country's benefit. That is a goal which will not percolate down to someone who's living in EMI, wants to make, genuinely just wants to move up and have a better life. But if you distill those benefits of doing or putting in the extra hustle as something which are tangible to that person, then that gives someone a clear goal to work towards, rather than an abstract society welfare, which we don't know what that actually means for that. Rahul Bajaj, the other aspect which I think the Capgemini CEO Ashwin Yardi has pointed out, it's not just about the number of hours, but it's also about what happens after the hours. Now, as a journalist at this point, I genuinely don't have the luxury of working by the clock. If something happens right now, my shift ends at 11 o'clock. If there's a breaking news which happens after 11 o'clock, I will have to stay to 12:30, and I will never get a part-time there. The taxing aspect then comes from the fact, Rahul Bajaj, that I have to constantly be on my phone to check my office WhatsApp groups, to check my emails. And that is the point where even when I'm outside office, I don't get the luxury of probably disconnecting. Should that then be the approach, which something which Ashwin Yardi has pointed out, that karwa lo log se mehnat, make them work for 9 hours, 10 hours, but after they're gone, during the weekend and off hours, leave them entirely alone?
So I think with both these statements, Ritangshu, you did answer the question itself. Now, the point is not logon se karwa lo, make them do it. Are they ready to do it because they love to do what they are doing? So if you are in journalism, it is your choice. And journalism, like healthcare, like law enforcement, is an area where you may have to be connected all the time. It's the trade requires certain things. And if it is your own choice. No one forced you to do that. Right. Similarly, if a doctor is going in there and they have initially 36 hours in their internships and all, it is what is demanded. Now they can't ask for a work-life balance of 40 hours because the healthcare unit requires that.
Yeah, I'm aware that I'm painfully aware, Rahul Bajaj, that this example, these debates don't apply to people in my profession. But let's talk about the corporate profession.
But there's also another thing where it is important that if someone is putting in that kind of an effort, then there has to be a reward equally given to them. Because again, we are not. You also mentioned that, let's say there are 4 different people. One wants to pursue a particular hobby in the evening, or they would want to do something else. They have their evening course to take care of. Good enough. But then you can't have a social or a socialist kind of a work environment where, irrespective of what
Okay.
someone is doing, you are equally rewarding everyone, right? Because socialism has never taken people in on the
Yes,
growth path.
because that never gives an incentive to anyone to work hard at this point. Here, Professor Swati Dhir, another important aspect which has often been ignored, which came up in the EY unfortunate episode that came last year. When we try to ape Western models about work-life balance, we often forget that Indians are a different species when it comes to work culture here. There is the concept of chaplusi, there's a concept of kushamad which always comes. So bosses tend to often ignore work-life balance and or productivity and go by someone who's maybe appeasing them a bit more. On the other side also, as a manager also, the concern often is that if I don't mandate a 9-hour shift, and if I say that people will leave at 6 hours, they will just idle for 6 hours. It's not that they will do the productivity of 9 hours within the space of 6 hours, which what a lot of companies abroad think though. Is it also a problem with the way Indians look at labor, in your experience as an HR or manager, that also needs to change if we have to bring in these changes of revolutionary changes of work-life balance?
Okay, so I think, yeah, it is very, very important that I agree with Mr. Bajaj saying that you choose your profession. So that part is very, very important, that you have chosen that profession, and then time is not something which will decide your output. So again, we should focus on the quality output. Now, doesn't matter you are spending 10 hours or 8 hours or 6 hours, but the quality of output is important. Having said that, it is not applicable in all the industries because, automobile, healthcare, different industries have different nature altogether. Now, talking about the work-life balance and the well-being part, I have seen my students, just after the MBA, they join, and then sometimes when they come back in the alums meetings and they actually share their experience that, ma'am, the work life, there is no boundary per se. And, life has become very, very, the boundaries are very blurred. So it's very, very important that the Indians, especially as you said, the Indian species, they are very different. So most of the time they become workaholic, and the workaholic becomes, actually it's okay for a short period, but it becomes very unhealthy and leads to high burnout, which
That's
is
true.
not healthy.
That's true.
So it's very, very important that as an employer, we take a right kind of measures to also ensure that even if a person is too overwhelmed with the work, we are putting certain boundaries. So, organizations need to have right practices to inculcate that well-being. Now, having said that, there's one more point which I wanted to add is the 80-20 rule. There would always be, 80%, work which is done by the 20% people. So it's also very important for any employer to reward these 20% people who are actually contributing to your 80% of the growth. And on that 80% side, you need to put certain kind of, hygiene factors, which are ultimately leading to the, efforts of the overall organizational growth. So again, it's like you have to make a balance, and how do you make it depending on
That
the
is such a
context.
vicious
It is
cycle,
where
Professor
you're,
Dheer. That is such
yeah,
a vicious cycle, Professor Dheer. You mentioned the 80-20 rule.
yeah.
Now, according to logic, if I see one person in my team who is an extra high performer who's working very hard, and I want to reward that person, I would go ahead and Shri Pathasati comment on that. The normal logic of an employer is to reward that person with probably a higher pay, a greater designation, and so and so. But what that does is further burden that individual. So if a 25-year-old high performer is outscoring his peers, his or her peers, that person gets a designation and performance of a 32-year-old or salary of a 32-year-old. By the time that person reaches that 30s, that person is so burnt out that, God forbid, there's a serious work pressure, there's a serious health scare. Ideally, the break that should have been given to that individual is, okay, you worked hard, here's 2 weeks of extra pay leave. But obviously, we are not going to look that way, are we?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the very interesting example comes to my mind when you said it. Yeah.
The way
No, Professor Dheer,
the way I would look at
let Professor Dheer complete and I'll come to you, Shri Pathasati.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, thank you. So it's like reward for more work is more work, right? So yeah, I agree with you that the reward should
Exactly.
the work should be that you get a off or you get a kind of a break, right? But it's a vicious cycle which we get most often in that trap. So it's like the company like Netflix, no rules, right? So there is no rule for leaves. There are unlimited leaves. But the repercussion of that rule is that nobody actually takes the leave because these are high peer pressure. So though we are not putting boundary of 100 hours, 120 hours, but people are actually not taking break. So at times that employer needs to ensure that we are making the policies which are helping ultimately to our employees. Yeah.
Shri Parthasati, do you agree with that view that it's ultimately the employer's job to ensure that employees have a work-life balance?
No, I would like to change that particular theme itself. It's not a work-life balance, it's a work-life fit. And let me explain what I mean by that. Today, if there's an employee who needs to go and attend to something in his family, he has to do that, right? And so he basically has his work, he has his life, and he has to basically fit everything together, and that is what he has to primarily do. That is one. Second is essentially when people come in, if there are people who have fire in the belly who are aspiring to grow at a very fast pace, agreed that the employer has to look at it in terms of their well-being and all of those particular aspects. But at the same time, if the person is aspiring to grow 3 years in 1 year and wants to continue to basically strive and is doing a high performance job on that without any particular burnout, there's no point in basically dissuading that particular person. Reward the person, yes, give them the incentives like go for a dinner, spend time with the family, quality of life and those kind of things so that they have a continuity and it's more sustainable. Do all of those particular things. But at the same time, there are people who, today in today's environment, I can tell you, there are people who want to work from home. Then the work ethic is basically down the tube, right? It's a question of how do you really balance all of those particular things. And I go back to the same point of it is all about productivity, it is about outcome, and it's all related to the goal settings and what is the aspiration of the individual. If you balance all of those, and to what
Shri
Rahul
Parthasati,
Bajaj
if I
said,
could just
also give
deviate
them
for
the
a
right,
second here.
right incentives.
Work
right?
from home is an
Yeah.
excellent example. No, work from home is an excellent example. You just gave a statement that work from home shows productivity goes down the drain. Why is it so? Because I was recently working abroad for a few long, and everywhere, even in international companies which operate out of India, Monday and Friday, for instance, are work from home. They are all adopted a hybrid model because they feel that, if the employee doesn't have to get ready for work and commute for a long hour in a place like Bangalore and a place like Gurgaon, that is time saved, that's energy saved, and the employee will actually be more productive working from the confines of the home. So why is it that in India we still feel that work from home is something which is bad productivity?
I'm sorry, I'm jumping in between, but
It is not always. And again, it is primarily the,
Let
it is
Mr. Shri
basically the
Parthasati
80-20
respond.
rule
I will
again.
come to you, Rahul
If you really
Bajaj.
look at it, yeah. So I look at it this way. It is, again, the 80-20 rule. 20% of the people who are working from home have a very strong and good work ethic, and they are basically contributing, which is where employers have no issue in terms of those particular people working from home and delivering their particular work. And so that is where one of the things that happens is when there are young workers, they would like to prefer to have them come in, teach them, and once they know what is the work dynamics, their work ethic, they're all willing to basically allow them to work. But also there are enough instances, and which is where worldwide employers are all asking their employees to come back, and which is where the challenge is, that employees essentially take that to be almost like working from home means almost it's like a holiday, right? I think it's a question of balance that they need to strike and measuring the outputs that are being generated by that employee.
Okay, Rahul, you wanted to come in before I'll go to Anulal for the final comments.
Ritangshu, no, I wanted to tell and share that 90% of my team works from home, and they are currently working from locations like Khanna Mandi in Punjab, a border town of Chhattisgarh and West Bengal, and they are equally productive. And in fact, I would say that they are much more productive had they been in the office. It all depends on, are we clear about telling them what exactly is expected from them, and then giving them the flexibility of delivering that particular thing irrespective of number of hours that they are putting in, right? So someone may require 8 hours to do that, someone may require 10 hours to do that. It's your take, right? But this is the expectation in this particular period of time. You work from wherever you want. The problem statement here also is that if we are saying that no, we want to have people sitting right in front of our eyes, and then we are also saying that no, then they have to work for 40 hours, 60 hours. It means, one, that we don't believe in our people, that they can work. Only we looking at them, only then they will be working. Second, we are not hiring brains, we are hiring hands. If you are only looking at hiring multiple hands, get automation done. If you're looking for brains, let them work from wherever they are working, give them the flexibility and don't count the hours.
So the point is, Rahul Bajaj, what you're describing is ideal, and ideally it should be a system everywhere. But I don't think not every company has the luxury of the very close association or the very close understanding which in your case you have developed with your employees, and I'm pretty sure it is likewise and reciprocated as well. That's also an important point, that smaller companies can afford to come up with better, with slightly more relaxed or more radical work hours, while the bigger companies or the established legacy brands who, again, unfortunately look at new employees as hands and as cogs in an assembly wheel, probably will not look at. That brings me, Anulal, to you for perhaps the last word. I think if there's one thing which we can sum up from this discussion is that there is no one size fit all, especially in the corporate space. And at the end of the day, if I am a job seeker or if I am a corporate worker, the choice is up to me as to what career paths to follow, but that requires me being completely aware of what the pros and cons will be for each path. If I decide to go and hustle a bit more, there are enough opportunities which I will get, given the fact that India is always looking for people to do an extra mile. While that may bring me immediate rewards in terms of a better pay or better designation, it will come at a cost, at the cost of my health, at the cost of my work-life balance, at the cost of my family. So at the end of the day, it comes down to us as individuals to make these choices and be aware of the pros and cons of each choice.
Very true. I mean, like what I started with saying, no, that if you have to achieve success in corporations, then yes, there is a particular way of doing it. But when you look at number of hours, which dhaba owner, which SME owner, which kirana shop owner, they don't count hours, but it's that they are working for themselves, so the reward is accruing to them, and it doesn't matter then. But here, corporations make people cogs in the wheel, and that's where the corporation style of work, we are constantly questioning the number of hours. So I think that's where the expectation setting goes a bit wrong.
All right. I think we have had a fascinating discussion at this point. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much, Shri Parthasarathi, Professor Swati Der, Rahul Bajaj, and Anulal. I think I have had a very excited and very illuminating discussion. Hopefully, our viewers have enjoyed it and learned something from that as well. Thanks a lot for joining us. The broadcast continues on the other side of a short break. We look at the top headlines and hopefully go a bit beyond them as well. Stay tuned to Mirror Now.